In this video, we'll see a real-world case study to better understand the cyber kill chain. In this study, we'll focus on the Ukraine power grid. On the left-hand side of the slide, there's a summary of the ICS cyber kill chain. As we saw it in the previous video, stage 1 will be mostly the IT part with the intrusion and all the steps here, and then stage 2 will be the actual ICS attack that has all the steps that we discussed before, from development all the way down to execute the ICS attack. And in the specific example we're looking at, we can observe most of these steps, and we'll go through one by one in the next few slides. On the right-hand side, you see the PERTU model, where we have the levels of the abstraction of the plant from level 0, the sensor actuators, all the way up to level 4, that's the external network hosts. And we'll see how the attackers entered from level 4. They were able to access the enterprise network, and they moved through the layers, through the levels, down to the sensors and actuators part to create the final ICS effect. That was the end of the attack, causing the power outages in Ukraine. So let's jump in and start with stage 1 and reconnaissance. So stage 1 reconnaissance, currently actually we don't have many reports of observed reconnaissance having taken place prior to the attack. We haven't seen in the log files or from the forensic analysis how exactly the attackers collected information about the targets and how they actually targeted the specific substations. However, the targets themselves were interesting because they did have high levels of automation in this distribution system. They did have remote access capabilities, so they were kind of prime targets for such an attack. And since at the end of the attack, there was very high coordination between all the different substations, the affected substations, that meant that reconnaissance took place at some point. Again, we understand that from the sophistication of the attack and the fact that all substations, more than 27, were affected at the same time. So that meant that there was enough information to understand how to coordinate such an attack. However, it's not very clear whether this attack was, the adversary started saying, okay, let's focus on that. Maybe they figured out that specific substation, specific companies, distribution companies, have this remote capability, remote access systems. However, what is very clear is that this was very unlikely to be an opportunistic attack, and whether the attackers just figured out let's attack the system, randomly selected something and just did it. It was a very highly sophisticated attack, very well coordinated. So it is clear, even though there's not evidence to show that, but it was clear that the attack was planned, tested, validated, and executed with utmost care. So that's for the reconnaissance part. Moving on, weaponization and targeting at step 2 in stage 1 of the cyber kill chain. Actually, targeting specific infrastructure was not necessary to gain access. Instead, the attackers went straight to weaponization, and they used, as we discussed also in the past, Microsoft Office documents, Excel and Word, by embedding a specific type of malware, this Black Energy 3, within the documents. And even though these actually samples of documents, they have been found not only in those power companies, but also in other parts of Ukraine. And it seemed that they were part of a broader campaign to target many Ukraine targets. Many organizations were sent those malware emails, and some of them went to the substations, and this is where the attackers were able to gain foothold within the power grid companies. So weaponization, again, in the cyber kill chain step, was done through malware, and malware was embedded in Microsoft Office documents. Next would be the cyber intrusion, delivery, exploit, and installation. The weapons, in this case malware, were delivered via email to individuals, either administrative or the NT network. And of course, since malware was embedded, when the documents were opened, in case macros were enabled, so many of us have opened documents we download from the internet, and you may know that some of the Office applications have these macros that they enable some kind of functionality in the document itself. So you can fill a form or you can do other things in the document. So this, because of security concerns, this macro functionality is disabled by default. In this attack, the attackers encourage the users to enable macros to have full functionality of the document, and once the macros were enabled, then the malware would be installed in the victim system, and it would take over by doing the rest of the steps that we have discussed in the past. So in a way, this was not a vulnerability. They didn't exploit a vulnerability in one of the systems, but it was mostly through social engineering. They convinced the human operators to open the documents, so sending them through email. The email, as we discussed in the past, looks like official correspondence from the Ukraine's Ministry of Energy. And after the emails were opened, then step 2, the users were encouraged to enable the macros through a pop-up. So once they did that, then the malware will take over. So it's not exactly a vulnerability that were exploited, that the attackers, the operators could do nothing about it, but it was mostly social engineering attacks where the operators were tricked into opening the email and then also further tricked into enable the macros, and then the software, the malware would be installed in the system, and that would complete that step of the cyber kill chain, the delivery, exploitation, and installation of the malware, of the weapon. Next would be command and control. So once in this step we have installed, the malware has been installed, then the malware also starts communicating back to the attacker through some specific command and control IP addresses. And it seems that the attacker have gained access at least 6 months before the outage happened in December. And they have used this time in order to get more information out of the system. So they harvest the credentials, they escalate the privileges, and they move throughout the environment. And in a way, after they have the initial foothold in place, so they got the malware installed in place, they did take specific steps to have persistence into the systems. And what was identified through forensic analysis is that they actually directly manipulated authentication authorization system to install themselves as legitimate users. So in the beginning, they just took over a machine, but then after they had access to the machine, they escalated privileges, and then they installed new users that they were themselves. So they were actually legitimately accessing the systems remotely. So they had credentials to get into the system and do some kind of an action that at the end of the attack would be actually to turn off power. So as the last bullet says, they quickly moved from the initial foothold to blending within the target system and being authorized users of the systems themselves. And that happened through the command and control, because after they were into the system, they sent information back, and through that information they were able to get to update the malware and update access to the system to, again, as we discussed, establish themselves. That's command and control. And finally, on the act part, so they manage through this process, and stage 1 again is going from the IT world to the initial access to the OT side, to the SCADA network in this example, in the Power Grid example. And once they enter the SCADA network, there were different technical configurations of the systems. So even though they're all part of a power grid, still they had different configurations. So the attackers had to be, the target was the same, turn off power, but the exact technical details were different between the impacted substations. So that meant, because in stage 2 things happened so quickly and in such coordination in different configurations, that indicates that the attackers had enough information to be able to deliver the attacks in coordination. One was the coordination in turning off the power in the specific regions, and also the firmware attacks on the serial to Ethernet devices were also also happened within seconds between each other. So that also meant, even though again technical configurations were different, the attackers had enough information to deliver them with coordination and consistency. Finally, the target systems use different distribution management systems. So network reconnaissance happened throughout the system, throughout those months that the attackers were in there to deliver their highly coordinated attack. So the last part of stage one would be to act on collecting information actually. It's finishing with reconnaissance on the ICS network this time to get enough information to deliver the stage 2 part of the cyber kill chain. So up to now we discussed this part. Stage 1, reconnaissance, not enough information to know exactly how they figured out where to attack, but the weaponization were malware, they deliver through email, exploitation and installation happened by the pop-up encouraging the users to install the malware. Command and control was connected through IP and then would send information to the attacker to act on collecting enough information to start the stage 2 part of the attack that was on the ICS side. So on stage 2 starts with develop, and the develop stage, as we saw before in the previous video, typically development happens in the adversary's network. So the adversary would collect all information from the target system, and then in their own networks, they would buy similar devices, actually the exact devices, the exact modems, and then they would try to orchestrate the attack, create an attack within their own system before they test it and they deliver it to the target system. So development happened in the adversary network, so we don't have information about how the development happened. We have limited visibility on that. But we have, by seeing how the attack took place, we can make good estimates about what happened in the development phase. So first, the attackers learned how to interact with those very different DMS environments, and they learned how to use the native control present in the system and operator screens. In a way, they had the screen the operators also had in front of them. They were able to move the mouse and give the right commands to be able to deliver the final attack. So that's the first part of the development. And second, they also developed malicious firmware and tested it on serial to Ethernet devices they have bought and they have used in the in-house. And the developed malware, the malicious malware malicious firmware was used to lock out the operators from the systems. And the fact that the malicious firmware was uploaded within a short period in each of the sites meant that it was heavily tested before deployment. And actually that's the next one, the next step, test in a test phase, where the report from SANS assesses with very high confidence that test happened exhaustively prior to deployment of the attack. Of course, it's possible that the attack could have taken place without much testing, and with much luck, they were able to get the attack through. But since the attack appeared to be extremely professional and very highly sophisticated throughout, we're very confident that the attack was tested before deployed into the field. So, as I said before, the attackers purchased similar equipment, they had them in the system, they evaluated and tested, and they were very confident that the attack would work once it happened in the real system before they deploying them on exactly December 23rd. So the test step of the cyber kill chain happened exhaustively in the months before the attack took place. So now the delivery part, the adversaries used native software. Remember now the adversaries had installed themselves, had persistence, and they had command and control. So they were able to send information directly to the SCADA system, and they had administration access to the operators' workstations, and they also use VPN to access the IT environment also to install whatever was needed for the attack to take place. So delivery happened directly by the attackers because they already had the administrative access and remote access from stage 1. And then installation, modification, the attackers install this kill disk. Kill disk is a mechanism for destroying the contents of the computer. And the last act of modification would be to actually make sure the operators were locked out of their systems. And the lockout will prolong the outage, because if the operators would just log in and restore the system, then the attacker wouldn't have lasted as many hours as it did. They would be able to very quickly recover from the attack. But as part of that step of the SES attack, the attackers made sure that the operators would be locked out from their systems. And the final step in the cyber kill chain would be the actual attack on the ICS system, and this is where the adversaries use the HMIs. So they were looking at the screen and they used the SCADA HMI to start the attack by opening the breakers. We're aware of at least 27 substations that were taken offline. They were taken offline in a similar way that the legitimate operator would take something offline for a reason of maintenance or some fault or something else happening in the system. So they were doing exactly similar actions to those substations. And these 27 substations impacted roughly 225,000 customers. So after using the HMIs to open the breakers, at the same time, the attackers uploaded that malicious firmware we discussed before, and then that would lock out the operators from the system. So the legitimate operators wouldn't be able to log in and recover the attack from the attack. So they had to actually physically go to the substation because they didn't have remote access to it. They had to go and revert to manual operation and then try to recover. At the same time, so first they opened the breakers, second they locked out the operators, and third they also performed the denial of service attack in the telephonic service. So typically whenever there's an outage, customers would call the company and say, hey, there's an outage, what's happening, when are we going to get the power back? And the part of the attack would be to also have fake calls, automated fake calls to the call center of the companies to ensure that the outages wouldn't be able to be reported. So this, we don't know exactly why this happened. One speculation would be that the attackers wanted to hide, because typically you get visibility to the system by the calls. If someone tells you, oh, we don't have power in that part of the country, then you know there's something wrong there, so you can go and investigate that. But there will also be the case of the attackers just wanted to increase frustration of the customers. They just wanted to decrease confidence in the company and increase kind of unrest within the country, within the regions, by not disabling or actually limiting the opportunity for the customers to talk to the company and ask what happened and get some information about the outage. To conclude, so the example we saw with the ICS cyber kill chain for the Ukraine power grid attack, we saw the two stages and the steps within the stage, from reconnaissance to the act of stage 1, and developed to the execution of the ICS attack in stage 2. And to quickly summarize, the attack started with phishing emails. The emails had malware as the weapon. That weapon was used to extract credentials, and once credentials were extracted, then the attackers installed themselves within the network, and they did further reconnaissance as the final step of stage 1 to get enough information to develop the actual ICS attack. In the ICS attack development, stage 2, they developed malicious framework. They hijacked the SCADA system, and once they did that, they locked the operators out. They issued open commands for the breakers, and they did other DOS-like attacks, UPS modification, we didn't see that, but they also, whenever they found UPS, they also infected that. And they uploaded the firmware for the serial to Ethernet modems, killed discover rights, leading to the final execution of the IC attack. That will be the power outage. And this concludes the example of seeing how a real attack maps to the IC cyber kill chain that we have discussed.